Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Lisa Ziegert? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Lisa Marie Ziegert was born on March 24, 1968, in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which is just north of Springfield. She grew up just south of Springfield in the town of Agawam. She was the second of 4 children. Lisa attended college and earned a degree in education. She returned home to Agawam and found part-time work as a teacher's aide in a middle school. Lisa also had a part-time job at a retail store called Brittany's Card and Gift Shop. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On April 15, 1992, Lisa left her job at the middle school in the afternoon and went to her job at the gift shop. At 5:30 p.m., her sister Lynn stopped by to see her. Lynn would later suggest that they had a normal conversation and nothing unusual occurred. They talked about Lisa's dream of being a full-time teacher someday. Lynn left the store at around 6 p.m. At around 8:30 p.m., a man named Gary Shera entered the store. He kidnapped Lisa and murdered her a short time later. Gary disposed of her body about 1 mile away in a clearing in a wooded area near Route 75. The next morning, April 16, Lisa's co-worker, Sophia Maynard, arrived at the store at 8:45 a.m. It was her job to open the store. She was surprised to notice a few things that were out of the ordinary. Lisa's car was in the parking lot. The open sign for the store was still displayed. The front door to the store was unlocked, and the lights were on. Sophia initially assumed that Lisa must have been in the store to inflate balloons. After Sophia walked into the store, she could hear a radio playing in the background. She called out Lisa's name, but did not receive a response. Sophia noticed that Lisa's purse and car keys were still under the counter. Sophia walked into the storeroom and saw that boxes had been knocked over and the back door was open. She immediately ran to a sandwich shop across the street and yelled for them to call the police. Here's what the police found when they examined the store. No money was taken from the cash register. There were 2 marks on the back door which looked like scuff marks from a shoe. And there was a small amount of blood on smashed boxes and on a few cards. The police believed that someone had kidnapped Lisa. An extensive search was conducted, but they did not have success. 3 days later, on April 19, which was Easter Sunday, a man walking behind his property in Agawam found Lisa's body. The police responded to the scene. Lisa had been stabbed about 6 times. She had been the victim of an assault of a sexual nature. The police found DNA on her body, which they presumed had been left there by the perpetrator. The police received a few leads, which helped them to build a timeline. A customer who had made a purchase at the gift shop at 8:20 p.m. on April 15 came forward. The individual had a receipt with a time on it. The customer said that they did not notice anything out of the ordinary during their visit. Lisa appeared to be fine, and the store was not disturbed. Another customer had been at the store at 9 p.m. She noticed that the front door was unlocked and the lights were on, but she didn't see anybody in the store. The customer walked into the store, heard a banging noise coming from the storeroom, and waited for a few moments for someone to come out. After no one did, the customer left the store. A woman who worked near the gift shop told the police that at 9:15 p.m. she was driving home. When she was at a stop sign at the intersection of Route 75 and Adams Street, she saw a vehicle that looked like a Ford Bronco pulled over on a piece of property near the woods. The woman said that there was a man in the front seat and a woman in the back seat. The vehicle drove into the woods. The area the woman described was not far from where Lisa's body was found. None of the leads that the police received led them to Gary Shera. He did not have a criminal record and was not a suspect. He was not on investigators' radar at all initially. It appeared as though Gary had escaped responsibility for the murder. In the months following the murder, as the investigation continued, Gary had some difficulties in his personal life. His estranged wife, Joyce, had taken their son out of state. Finding himself alone, Gary decided to start dating again. In January 1993, about 9 months after Lisa's murder, Gary called a woman who he briefly dated in high school named Noelle Delorier to ask her out on a date. Noelle went on a date with Gary, but did not believe having a romantic relationship with him was a good idea. Gary had a lot of drama in his life due to the custody situation with his estranged wife. About a month later, the police found Joyce and Gary's son living in Seattle. Through her attorney, Joyce informed the police that Gary had an unusual obsession with the Lisa Ziegert case. Also, a few days before the murder, Gary purchased a music box from the gift shop where Lisa worked. Joyce accused Gary of being the killer. The police were highly skeptical about Joyce's allegations. Other women had come forward and accused their former lovers of murdering Lisa. Apparently, this is something the police had seen a few times in this investigation. Joyce had a long history of excessive alcohol use and was angry with Gary over the custody dispute. The police dismissed her claims. They still did not have any evidence whatsoever connecting Gary to the murder, but at least they were now aware of him. By 2008, advancements in DNA technology had given new life to the case. The police were eagerly trying to collect DNA samples from potential suspects. They decided to interview Gary based on the accusations made by his ex-wife Joyce, but they still didn't have much reason to believe that he was involved. During the interview, Gary was careful not to do anything which could leave behind his DNA. For example, he would not take a bottle of water offered to him by the police. When the police requested a DNA sample, Gary refused, saying that he was afraid of being cloned. He had a good point. People should have been concerned about the possibility of more than one Gary running around. There was nothing the police could do, as Gary was within his rights. 10 other potential suspects also refused to provide a DNA sample, so it wasn't like Gary's refusal was that unusual. About 7 years later, in 2015, Gary ran into Noelle at a high school reunion. Again, this was the woman who he went on a date with right after his estranged wife left with his son. Noelle wasn't interested at that time, but now she was divorced and looking for new love. The couple dated for a few months, and the relationship was mostly going well, but then Noelle observed something unusual about Gary. He always avoided contact with the police, no matter how benign the circumstances. For example, he wouldn't even walk through a police checkpoint at the Boston Marathon. Noelle continued to date Gary despite his bizarre behavior. In 2017, the police were able to obtain a court order to collect the DNA from the potential suspects who had refused. Again, there were 11 potential suspects who refused to provide a DNA sample, including Gary. The police stopped by Gary's residence on September 13, 2017. They spoke to Gary's roommate, who told them Gary was not there. After Gary found out about the police visit, he asked Noelle to spend the night at her residence. The next day, he left 3 letters behind and disappeared. One was a confession to Lisa's murder. The second letter was his last will and testament, and the third letter was an apology to Lisa's family. Noelle took the letters to a nearby state police barracks and showed them to the officers. The police found Gary's vehicle in a hospital parking lot by tracking his cell phone. He had consumed a handful of ibuprofen, then walked into the hospital's emergency room. The police entered the hospital and arrested Gary without incident. Gary requested an attorney and refused to talk to the police. Gary's DNA was a match to the DNA found on Lisa's body. Gary was charged with 3 offenses, including murder. In 2019, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, and the other charges were dismissed. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gary never offered any explanation for his behavior outside of the letters. He never spoke to the police or the media. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Gary had been in the foster care system in California for several years. After being adopted by a husband and wife, they all moved to Massachusetts. During the time Gary was with his girlfriend Noelle, he drove a shuttle for a vehicle rental company. Noel said that Gary loved dogs and Agatha Christie novels. He was a thoughtful, romantic partner who would make her soup and decorate Christmas cookies, but he did not have sex with her. Gary identified with the fictional character Bruce Wayne. He was a big fan of all of the Batman movies. He would often wear Batman t-shirts. As far as music, Gary had a particular affinity for the Billy Joel song, An Innocent Man. Sometimes people like songs containing imagery about a status they can never obtain. Maybe that was the attraction for Gary. A more appropriate song for Gary would have been I Go to Extremes. Item number 2 is a summary of the confession letter that Gary left for his girlfriend, Noel. In the letter, Gary indicated that he loved Noel. He was pleased with the relationship. He wrote that she was going to find out awful things about him on that day, like he had murdered a woman 25 years ago. Gary indicated that he was guilty, but he did not initially intend to kill his victim. He regretted his behavior. He knew that it would catch up with him someday. Gary never felt like a normal person. From a young age, he was fascinated with abduction and bondage. He could not keep those ideas out of his thoughts. Gary never committed another crime like the murder again. He went for years despising himself. Gary considered turning himself in to the authorities hundreds of times, but he was a coward. He ended the letter by advising Noel not to do anything to defend him, like do not hire an attorney. Gary said that he was not worth it. It's not clear why Gary chose to write the letter to his girlfriend. Perhaps he just had an urge to tell her about it, or maybe it was a matter of trust. Now moving to my final item, number 3. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Gary admitted that he had intrusive thoughts about kidnapping and bondage. Some people who have these types of disturbing fantasies view the thoughts as normal. This is referred to as egosyntonic. Other people view the thoughts as worrisome and not consistent with their understanding of morality. This is referred to as egodystonic. It appears as though Gary fell into the latter category. He was upset by his thoughts. He wanted them to go away. He did not feel like a good person because he had those thoughts. Unlike many people who someday go on to commit a crime like the one featured in this case, Gary did not have a criminal record. He managed to refrain from acting on his disturbing thoughts, but they were always reminding him that homicide was a possibility. At some point, Gary encountered Lisa. He probably just happened to enter the gift shop one day and noticed her, perhaps when purchasing the music box. After this, Gary became obsessed with Lisa. He did not enjoy the feeling, but he was being pushed by the intrusive thoughts. This created a terrible struggle in his mind. Gary's sense of morality was telling him to refrain from acting, as the thoughts were telling him to commit murder. Ultimately, Gary gave in to his fantasy. Despite his claims of not intending to kill, he probably did premeditate the murder. For example, he brought a knife with him, and he may have loitered around the shop for a while before entering. A suspicious person was spotted in that area not long before Lisa disappeared. After the murder, Gary struggled with his actions. He felt remorse and wanted to atone for his sins, but he did not like the idea of going to prison for life. Gary continued on with his life, but the sword of Damocles dangled above his head. He could never feel at peace. Instead of sailing on a river of dreams, he found himself in no man's land. Gary would remember about how at any moment his life as he knew it could end. When the police stopped by Gary's residence looking for him, he knew his worst nightmare was a reality. His silence had bought him 25 years of freedom, but now it was time to pay. He was going to go to prison for the longest time. Those are my thoughts in the case of Lisa Ziegert. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.